The old man stopped in front of the grave and didn't move. For a long moment it looked like he had forgotten why he came. Then he whispered something, barely audible. "I think she's been waiting for me." There was no one else in the cemetery that morning. No footsteps, no distant voices, no wind moving through the trees, just silence and the quiet weight of memory. Walter Hayes had stood in that exact spot every Sunday for 15 years. Same time, same path, same grave. He knew every crack in the stone, every shift in the light, every shadow that passed over the name carved into it, Daniel Brooks. But that morning, something was different. It started with the smell, soft, familiar, out of place. Roses, not strong, not overwhelming, just enough to make him pause. Walter frowned slightly. There were no flowers nearby, no fresh offerings, no reason for that scent to be there. And then he saw it, something small, resting gently on top of the gravestone, right above Daniel's name. Walter blinked, once, twice. His breath slowed, because he knew, with absolute certainty, that object had not been there before. He stepped closer, careful, almost afraid to disturb whatever moment this was. And when he finally saw it clearly, his hand began to tremble. A rosary, blue beads, worn, simple, and impossibly warm. Walter didn't touch it yet. He just stood there, listening, waiting, because for the first time in 15 years, he felt like he wasn't alone. The cemetery sat just outside a small town in Ohio where the roads narrowed and the noise of the world seemed to fade without warning. It wasn't a place people passed through. It was a place they arrived at, slowly, deliberately. Walter Hayes had been making that drive for 15 years. Same old pickup truck, same early morning light, same quiet routine that no one else ever saw. He would park near the entrance, turn off the engine, and sit there for a moment before stepping out. Not because he needed to, but because something inside him always hesitated, as if crossing that short distance meant stepping back into a moment that never truly ended. Walter was 72 years old, a retired Marine, the kind of man who didn't talk much about the past, not because he forgot, but because he remembered too clearly. Daniel Brooks had been more than a friend. He had been the one person who understood the silence, the kind that followed after explosions, after loss, after nights that never quite left you. They had served together overseas, shared meals that tasted like nothing, jokes that only made sense in the dark, and promises that felt unbreakable at the time. Until one night, everything changed. Walter came back, Daniel didn't. And that was where the story stopped for everyone else, but not for Walter, because before that last mission, there had been a promise, a simple one. "I'll look after them." Daniel had smiled when he said it, like it was nothing, like it was guaranteed. Walter had believed it too. He visited Daniel's grave every week, but he didn't come just to remember. He came because that promise had never been fulfilled. Not completely. Not the way it was supposed to be, and deep down he had never stopped wondering why, or what he had missed, or whether something was still waiting to be found, right there, in the silence. Walter lowered himself down slowly, the way he always did, careful with his knees, careful with the years that had settled into his bones. For a moment he said nothing, just looked at the name. Then he exhaled. "I came back again," he murmured. His voice was steady, but quieter than usual. "I told you I would." His fingers brushed lightly across the engraved letters, as if trying to remember the feeling of a hand that was no longer there. "Every week," he added, "in case it still matters." The rosary remained in his other hand. He hadn't put it down, hadn't let go, because something about it felt connected, not just to Daniel, but to something unfinished. Walter swallowed. "There's something I never told you," he said. His eyes stayed fixed on the stone. "I tried. A pause, longer this time. I really tried to keep my promise. The memory came back in fragments. Emily, standing at the door after the funeral, pale, silent, holding her son close like the world was already trying to take him too. Walter had shown up every week back then too, fixing things around the house, bringing groceries, sitting in silence when there was nothing to say. He thought that was enough. But 6 months later, they were gone. No call, no message, no forwarding address, just an empty house and neighbors who didn't know anything. Walter had searched for weeks, then months, even filed missing person reports that led nowhere. Eventually, people stopped asking, stopped caring. Life moved on. But he didn't. Because a promise like that, it doesn't disappear just because the trail goes cold. Walter tightened his grip on the rosary. His voice dropped to a whisper. I should have done more. The words lingered in the air, heavy, unanswered, and for a brief second, the scent of roses returned, stronger than before, as if something had heard him. Walter didn't move for a long time, not even after the scent faded, not even after the silence returned. He was still kneeling there, the rosary resting in his hand, turning it slowly, feeling each bead, as if the answer might be hidden somewhere between them. This was yours, he whispered. His voice was steadier now, but deeper, more certain. I remember. The blue beads caught the light just slightly, worn smooth from use, not new, not recently placed, and yet it had been here, waiting. Walter finally stood up, slower than before, his eyes still locked on the small object in his palm. He looked around again, carefully this time, scanning every row, every path, every tree. Nothing, no one. The cemetery was exactly as it had always been, quiet, still, unchanging. But something inside him had shifted, because this wasn't memory. It wasn't coincidence, and it wasn't something he could explain away. Walter took a step back from the grave, then another, as if creating distance would help him see things more clearly. But it didn't. Instead, the scent returned, stronger now, closer, not drifting, not fading. It surrounded him, warm, gentle, and unmistakably real. Walter closed his eyes for a brief second, not in fear, not in confusion, but in recognition. He had smelled something like this before, not here, not recently, but somewhere, long ago, somewhere tied to a moment he hadn't thought about in years. And just as quickly as it came, the scent softened again, fading into the morning air, leaving behind only the quiet and the rosary. Walter opened his eyes, looked down at it one more time, then back at Daniel's name. And for the first time, a thought crossed his mind that he couldn't ignore. This wasn't just a sign, it was a direction, and somehow, he knew. He was supposed to follow it. Walter stood there, the rosary still in his hand, and let the silence settle again. But this time, it wasn't empty. It was pulling something out of him, something old, something buried deeper than he expected. He closed his fingers around the beads, and the memory came back, not slowly, not gently, but all at once. A different place, a different time, dust in the air, heat pressing down on everything, and Daniel sitting on a crate, laughing about something that didn't matter anymore. He had been holding this same rosary, turning it between his fingers the exact same way Walter was doing now. My mom sent this, Daniel had said. He hadn't looked serious when he said it, more like amused. She thinks the Virgin Mary keeps an eye on soldiers. Walter had smirked back then, said something about needing more than that, something louder, something stronger. Daniel had just shrugged. Maybe, he said, but sometimes quiet things work better. Walter hadn't understood that. Not then, not in a place where everything depended on noise, speed, and survival. But now, standing in the stillness of a cemetery, holding something that shouldn't be there. He did. Because this wasn't just a memory anymore. It was a connection, a thread that hadn't been cut. Walter opened his eyes again, looked down at the rosary, then back at Daniel's name, and something inside him shifted, not confusion, not doubt, something closer to recognition, like he had just remembered a piece of a conversation that was never finished. And somehow, this was the part that came next. That night, the house felt different, not darker, not colder, just unsettled. Walter placed the rosary carefully on the small wooden table beside his bed. He didn't tuck it away, didn't question it anymore. He just left it there, where he could see it, where it could stay. He lay down slowly, staring at the ceiling. Sleep didn't come easily. It hadn't in years. But that night, it came without warning. And when it did, it didn't feel like sleep. It felt like stepping into something already waiting. Walter found himself standing back in the cemetery. Same path, same grave. But everything was quieter than before. Too quiet. Even for that place. The air didn't move. The light didn't shift. And then he saw her, not far from Daniel's grave. A woman, standing still, dressed in blue. The color was soft, not bright, not unnatural, just present. Like it belonged there. Walter didn't feel afraid. He didn't step back. He didn't question what he was seeing, because something inside him already knew. She didn't speak, not a single word. She didn't need to. She simply raised her hand, slowly, gently, and pointed. Not at the grave, not at him, but beyond, past the rows of stones, past the trees, toward something he couldn't fully see, but somehow understood. Walter followed the direction with his eyes, trying to focus, trying to make sense of what she wanted him to see, and just as he began to understand, the scene shifted, fading softly, like it had never been solid to begin with. Walter woke up instantly, sitting upright, breathing hard. The room was dark, quiet, but not empty. Because the scent was there again, roses, faint, but undeniable. Walter looked at the rosary beside his bed, then toward the window. And for the first time, he didn't wonder if it was real. He only wondered where it was leading him. Walter didn't wait long. By mid-morning, he was already in his truck, engine running, hands resting on the wheel. The rosary sat beside him on the passenger seat. He glanced at it once, then started driving. He didn't set a destination, didn't open a map, didn't call anyone, because the direction he had seen, it wasn't something you could type into a GPS. It was a feeling, a pull, subtle but steady, the kind you don't question once you recognize it. Walter drove through familiar roads at first, past places he had known for years, gas stations, empty fields, old storefronts with fading signs. Everything looked the same, but it didn't feel the same, because this time, he wasn't just passing through, he was following something. After nearly an hour, he slowed down, not because he planned to, but because something caught his eye. A house. A simple, quiet, set back from the road. There was nothing unusual about it, no sign, no movement, nothing that should have made him stop. But he did. Walter pulled over slowly, turned off the engine, and sat there for a moment, watching, listening. The air was still again, just like the cemetery. He stepped out of the truck, closed the door gently, and walked toward the house. Each step felt heavier than it should have, not from fear, but from certainty. As he got closer, he saw it, near the window, inside the house, a small statue, the Virgin Mary, dressed in blue, head slightly bowed, hands open, welcoming. Walter stopped walking. His breath caught for a second, because the image matched perfectly, the color, the stillness, the presence. It was the same, not similar, not close, the same. Walter reached into his pocket and felt the rosary. And in that moment, the direction from the dream became clear. This was where it started. Walter stood at the edge of the porch for a moment before knocking. Not because he was unsure, but because something about this place felt fragile, like whatever waited on the other side of that door could disappear if he moved too quickly. He raised his hand, knocked twice, then stepped back. There was a pause, long enough to notice the quiet again, long enough to hear his own breathing. Then the door opened. A woman stood there, mid-40s, calm but cautious. "Can I help you?" she asked. Walter nodded once. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said. "I used to know the people who lived here years ago." The woman studied him for a second, then her expression softened slightly. "Oh, the previous owners?" Walter nodded again. "Did they leave anything behind?" Another pause, this one shorter. The woman turned her head slightly, thinking. Actually, yes," she said. "Something in the attic, I think. We never really went through it." Walter didn't speak, didn't rush her. He just waited. Moments later, she returned with a small box, old, edges worn, dust still clinging to the corners. Walter took it carefully, almost like it mattered more than it should. He opened it slowly. Inside, photos, faded, letters, folded neatly, and beneath them, a single piece of paper, an address, handwritten, not from this town, not even from this state. Walter read it once, then again, New Mexico. His grip tightened slightly, because now, it wasn't just a feeling anymore, it was a path, and for the first time in years, he finally knew where to go next. 2 days later, Walter was on the road, not a short drive, not something he could finish in an afternoon. This was different. Miles stretched ahead of him, long and quiet, the kind of roads that made you think, or remember, or question things you had kept buried for years. The landscape changed slowly. Green faded into brown, trees gave way to open land, then to something wider, emptier. New Mexico greeted him with heat and silence. The sky felt larger there, the air thinner, and the distance between places longer than expected. Walter drove for hours without turning on the radio. He didn't need noise, because something else was already filling the space. That same feeling, the one that had started at the grave, the one that had followed him ever since, not loud, not demanding, just present. At one point, he pulled over on the side of the road, not because he was tired, but because the silence became too noticeable. He stepped out of the truck, closed the door, and stood there for a moment. The wind moved lightly across the desert, dry, warm, but gentle. Walter reached into his pocket and took out the rosary, held it loosely, not gripping it this time, just letting it rest in his hand. And then it happened again. The scent, roses, soft, out of place, but unmistakable. Walter didn't react immediately. He didn't look around, didn't question it, because now he understood something he hadn't before. He wasn't searching blindly anymore. He was being led. And wherever this road ended, he knew. He wasn't arriving alone. The house was smaller than Walter expected, weathered, quiet, the kind of place that looked like it had learned to survive without asking for much. He stood at the front door for a moment, the address in his hand, the rosary in his pocket. Then he knocked, once, then again. There was movement inside, slow, careful. The door opened just slightly at first, then wider, and everything stopped. The woman standing there didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Walter recognized her immediately. Older now, lines where there hadn't been before, but unmistakably Emily. Her eyes widened slowly, not in fear, not in confusion, but in something deeper, something she hadn't felt in a long time. "How?" she began, but the words didn't finish. Walter didn't step forward, didn't explain. He simply reached into his pocket and held up the rosary. Blue beads, worn, familiar. Emily's hand moved to her mouth. Her breath caught. Tears came before she could stop them. "I haven't seen that in years," she whispered. Walter nodded once. "I found it," he said. A pause, then quieter. "Or it found me." Emily stepped back slowly, opening the door wider, letting him in. The room inside was simple, sparse, but lived in. They sat across from each other without speaking at first, because some things don't need to be rushed. Finally, she looked at him. "You shouldn't have found me," she said softly. Walter didn't react. He just listened. "I couldn't stay there," she continued. "Every corner, every room, it reminded me of him." Her voice trembled. "And my son?" She stopped, took a breath. He left. Walter's expression didn't change, but something inside him tightened. "How long?" he asked. Almost 10 years." Silence filled the space again, heavy, unresolved. Emily looked down at the rosary in his hand, then back at him. "I prayed for him," she said, "every night." Her voice broke, but nothing ever came back. Walter leaned forward slightly, not with answers, not with certainty, but with something else, a quiet conviction he hadn't had before. "Maybe," he said slowly, "it just took longer than we expected." Walter didn't try to convince her, didn't argue, didn't explain what he didn't fully understand himself. He simply reached out and placed the rosary gently on the table between them. "Let's try one more time," he said. Emily looked at him, tired, uncertain. But something in his voice was different. Not forceful, not hopeful in a loud way, just steady. Like he had already decided. She hesitated for a second, then slowly, she nodded. They bowed their heads, awkward at first. Two people who hadn't prayed together, two people who had spent years carrying things alone. Walter's voice was quiet, simple. No perfect words, no memorized prayer, just a few sentences, honest, unfiltered. Emily followed, her voice breaking, pausing, continuing. The room felt still again, not empty, but full. And as the last words faded, there was a sound, a knock. Soft, but clear. Both of them froze. Neither moved at first. Then it came again. A second knock, this time stronger. Emily stood up slowly, her hands shaking. Walter didn't follow. He stayed where he was, watching, listening. She walked to the door, each step slower than the last, as if the moment itself might disappear if she rushed it. Her hand touched the handle, paused, then turned. The door opened, and everything changed. A young man stood there, mid-20s, tired, unshaven, eyes uncertain, but familiar, too familiar. Emily's breath caught, her voice barely a whisper. "Michael?" The young man swallowed. I don't know why," he said, "but something told me I needed to come back." Walter closed his eyes for a brief second, not in surprise, but in understanding, because now he knew exactly why. Some miracles don't arrive with noise. They don't break the sky open. They don't demand attention. They come quietly, through something small, a memory, a scent, a single object left in the right place, at the right time. Walter didn't find answers that day, not the kind he had spent years looking for, but he found something deeper, a reminder that no promise is ever truly forgotten, and no prayer is ever wasted, even the ones whispered in silence, even the ones that seem to go unanswered, because sometimes the answer is already moving, already finding its way back. You just don't see it yet. If this story touched you, type Blue Rosary in the comments, and take a moment to share this video with someone who might need hope today. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Quiet Grace Stories, because the quietest moments are often where grace speaks the loudest.